Just to talk about your Wexford career and just your interest in playing with the purple and gold. Can I ask you, do you remember your first All Ireland, first All Ireland you ever attended?
I do, yeah. Unusually, would you believe it was the 1974 Football All Ireland? My father, I was always a big Dubs fan, football fan. I love the Dubs of the 70s. And this was a big treat. I was 8 or 9 years of age on the top deck of the Cusick stand. Paddy Cullen in the goal, making a save from Liam Salmon. Just incredible stuff. And I love Brian Mullins. I loved Anton O'Toole, Bobby Doyle, these guys, Kevin Moore. And even though he played with the wrong soccer club, but I used to love watching him play. So I was a big Dublin fan, and 74 All Ireland was the first ever All Ireland that I went to as a supporter. And of course, the Hill was just after being reborn that time as well. So that was a very special occasion. 76 was the first All Ireland senior hurling final. Shane, that I attended, and again, good reason to attend it because Wexford were the team in it. And I was 11 years of age. I went up on a bus, on a Buffers Alley bus. We used to go everywhere on the Buffers Alley bus that time, and we were on Hill 16 beside the Cork fans, with the famous American flag that they used to have, and the atmosphere was incredible. And although I loved Wexford that time, from in the goal John Nolan right down through Willie Murphy, Ned Buggy, Heffaway, all those guys. Colm Dorn was a particular favourite as a wing back, Mick Butler, Tony Dorn. But I actually loved the Cork team as well. They were the three in a row Cork team that I saw winning the first one. And Ray Cummins, Jimmy Barry Murphy, they were pretty. I hated them for beating Wexford, but I always kind of loved them then as players, a kind of as such. And Charlie McCarthy, guys like that. John Horgan with the flowing white hair. And the one thing I'd say, Shane, what kind of cemented my love for Cork hurling was Ray Cummins in the Munster final. There were 30 points up to Waterford, racing through and hand passing the ball over the bars as an act of sportsmanship, really. That he went up. I used to always think Tony Dorn should get the All Star every year, but Ray deserved a few All Stars as well. A great player, really. But that was my first All Ireland. And
So Cork beat you in 1976, and then a year later you meet them again, similar thing again. And what comes to my mind, because these games have been on TV recently, is the likes of Shawnee O'Leary. He gets the burst nose, and then he goes out and plays, and man of the match type performance. It must have been tough to watch it 2 years in a row.
it was, it was tough, Shane, and probably one of the things that maybe wasn't good out of it was that we kind of got this thing that, Ginny, can we win in All Ireland, and maybe that kind of the psyche of Wexford people. We'd been beaten by Cork 70, 76, 77. We're like, are we losers forevermore? But no, they were still great memories for me. And I remember going to the 77 All Ireland final with my father and mother, and I was sitting in the Cusick, and my mind's eye picks up Christy Keogh's last minute shot at what do you call it, at Martin Coleman in the Cork goal, and a brilliant save, and it kind of denied us. And you do go away. I remember even the 76 one, Tony Dorn got the ball out of the corner when we were kind of winning the game by 3 points, and he was pulled down by Pat McDonnell, and the referee blew the whistle and gave a throw in, which would have put us 4 points up with maybe 7 or 8 minutes to go. We just never seemed to get the rub of the green, Shane, when we really needed to get the rub of the green. But, there were great occasions, and those guys became great heroes to me and to that generation of young people in Wexford.
Could you recall getting called up to the panel the first time? Was it a phone call, letter? What way was it done?
Yeah, it was a bit unusual, Shane. It was 1984, believe it or not, and I was called into the Wexford panel in. I think I got a phone call on the Thursday. Wexford on the Sunday were going up to play Roscommon in the Centenary Cup. I think everyone remembers that game because Wexford were beaten by Roscommon in the Centenary Cup in 1984, and there was war the next day. And I always remember that I was called into the Wexford panel, told to be there for training on Tuesday night, and on Monday there was an absolute media frenzy about Wexford being beaten by Roscommon, and then there was a question if fellas were drinking the night before. And I always remember I went into the training, but there was no training because there was a meeting between management and players. So went down to Murphy Floods. Wasn't the nicest place to be. Now there was a lot of giving out, and between players, management, and whatever. So I came back. That was Tuesday. I came back, trained Thursday night, and I got a phone call Friday morning. I was 84. I was probably 19. Got a phone call Friday morning that I was being dropped out of panel. because that didn't think that I was going well enough. So I was kind of smiling. I would have taken from the phone call on Thursday. I was in the panel for 8 days. That was my first ever call up, but I didn't get any game, as the fella says. So that was the start. But I had no problem with that. I enjoyed it. But in '85, then John Doyle from Buffers Alley took over the team and got my first championship start that year. But my first game was in Callan, and I played on the great Joe Hennessy, who was an absolute legend, really, And Joe was the cleanest hurler in Ireland. Now, he'd clean you, but he wouldn't have to hit you to do it. He was that kind of a great James Stevens man. So played up in Callan. Nolan Park was closed, and that was my first ever National League game. Played Laois. Would you believe Laois put us out of the championship that year? Eugene Fenley went on a scoring spree around the middle of the field for Laois, scored frees from everywhere. And I always remember that Laois team, Shane, because we would always say we're unlucky, but by God, that Laois team were very, very unlucky the year as well. Like they did, the Bohans, they had Pat Critchley, John Taylor, who's one of the best wing backs I have ever hurled on. It's super, super players that time. Niall Rigney, Niall came a little bit later, but just Laois were really punching well that time as well. Leinster was a hotbed enough that time, and Laois were one of the unlucky teams. They could very easily have been turned into an Offaly, and maybe were a bit unlucky not to.
Was there a sense from your point of view, or even looking back now, that team 76, 77 would have begun to break up, and when you came along it was probably a little bit too late, because you were growing up going to All-Irelands?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, we were. I don't think we thought too much about it. I mean, my debut was made in '85, and it was 9 years after. So the 76, 70, there was very few of that team left. John Nolan was playing a little bit, but there wasn't too many of that team left. I kind of came with a different raft of hurlers, I suppose. The Jimmy Houlihan era, the Eamon Cleary era, John O'Connor, George. George would have started in '79, so we would have come with that. And again, I maybe get onto it, Shane. I would be the one thing that kind of bugs me about even the '90s, Wexford's '90s team. I came on in '85. We were very unlucky. Michael O'Grady, who's living in Dublin now, was one of our managers. Brilliant, brilliant guy as well. We were very unlucky. '88, we would do the hard work. We beat Kilkenny in the Leinster semi-final, and along come Offaly, and they would beat us in the Leinster final. We'd have made ourselves overriding favourites, go in then with our eyes closed, and Offaly would beat us. And we should have won a Leinster championship that time. But what you have to remember that time as well was that you get up on a Sunday morning, you had one championship game. If you had a sniffle or a pain in your head, your chance was gone. And there was no chance for any consistency. And we seemed to suffer from the fact that we'd play against the Kilkennys or the Offaly's, who were probably the best team in the country. We were very often the second best team in the country, and yet never got past the first round. So at least the system gives a little bit of help on that. But I always feel, I hear some of the writers talking about the 90s teams, and they dismiss Wexford quite a bit. They say they were probably one of the not so good teams that won in All-Ireland. But 91, say DJ's famous 12 steps would have kind of finished this in the championship. They went out to an All-Ireland, won the next two. 93, we played 3 league finals down in Cork, against Cork down in Thurles. Should have won each one of them, didn't win any of them. Now it's our own fault. We went to a Leinster final 4 points up, 6 minutes to go in the Leinster final of '93. Kilkenny romped to an All-Ireland after it, but I always remember the '93 Leinster final. I was captain that year. Aidan McSwivna was refereeing. I said to him just before Damien Fitz booked out the last ball, I said, how much time is left? He said, there's about 30 seconds left here, 2.5 minutes into injury time. And I remember saying to him, would you just blow it up? We won the ball, got it in, but then Kilkenny, I don't know, you might have been too young, Shane, went up the far wing. Like, it was brilliant stuff. Liam Simpson to Adrian Ronan, absolute. Liam Keown, I think, fitted in somewhere in between, and then across to Morrissey over the bar. We drew. I remember Willie O'Connor saying to me after the game, shaking hands, and Willie said, hard luck. And it struck with me, why was he saying hard luck? It was a draw, but that's the way they looked at it. Maybe that's the way we looked at it. But then we came back in '96 and we won the All-Ireland. '97 we had semi-final. '98, Johnny Dooley robbed us really with a last minute goal. A lot of people talk about Clare losing the All-Ireland that year, but people kind of refer to us as maybe, I felt we were one of the best teams of the 90s, maybe that's a biased opinion, but for a bit of luck, maybe we could have won another All-Ireland or two, really, but that's my rant over for today anyway, Shane. Sorry for
you're well entitled to it. Do you talked before about maybe being the second best team in the country at times, but do you think that you always believed it yourselves, that maybe the raw materials were there, but the reason you came up a bit short is you didn't fully believe in yourselves?
Yeah, I've always said that, Shane. I mean, not to jump into Liam Griffin, but he changed a lot of mentality. You know, we were very unlucky in '93. I think it was more bad luck in '93 than anything else, you know. But because we really, you know, we had done everything to beat Kilkenny, bar 30 seconds, and then they come up with with the score of the century, with the team score of the century, which only Kilkenny do. But '96 Griffin, I think when he came in '95. Maybe things didn't go that well, but he definitely did feel that he had changed the psychology of Wexford hurling. And he did a lot of things. We got fitter. We trained 167 times or something in 300 nights leading up to the '96 All Ireland. He started doing statistics, you know, stuff like that, measuring where we were. But I think one of the big things he did, he really, really did work on the psychology of the thing. Brought in Niamh Fitzpatrick, who was an incredible sports psychologist. And we would have spent a lot of time with Niamh Fitzpatrick prior to '96. And I think when the thing gets very, very close, the psychological part of it comes into it very, very big time. Bit of luck as well, I suppose, Shane, but certainly there was a psychological edge that Griffin did change that time.
Because you would have been a gifted, talented hurler, but was there anything that was said to you or done with you either by Fitzpatrick or Liam Griffin that kind of had an impact on you?
Yeah, I remember in the mid '90s, early '90s, I should say, Shane, a fella came up to me. I was after being appointed captain with Wexford, but a fella close to the team came up to me and he said, well done in the captaincy. He says, you have it every way. He says, you can strike left or right. You have every bit of skill. He says, but you just don't seem to be able to do it when it comes to it, he says to me. So it didn't give me great confidence. I said, well, I thought it was a bit harsh, kind of a switch. But I suppose the one thing Griffin did, he dropped me, Shane. You know, I was always pretty sure of my place on the team. And I remember in '95, towards the end of '95, he kind of came in and he didn't feel that maybe that I was worth persevering with for another year. And I always say to Griffin that I was lucky he came along, but he was lucky I stayed there as well, kind of, because I was very, very close, Shane. And it just tell you how close you can be to kind of giving up on your dream at the wrong time. But I remember I got a phone call from Liam before the Leinster quarter final in '96 to say that I wasn't starting on the team. And I remember my brother-in-law, Niall Flynn, who sadly, would you believe, passed. He had an accident about a month later, and he actually passed away. Niall was hanging curtains for me in the house at home, and I'd be useless now at home. You know, you'd only have to ask the wife. But Niall was hanging curtains, and I had said to Griffin, "That's it, retiring, giving up, and whatever." I remember Niall talking to me and said, "Do you really think that's sensible? Why don't you might as well go to the match anyway on Sunday?" So he was one of the ones, Mickey Kinsley, who was the county secretary. I kind of said to him I was going to give it up as well. And this was all in a year, Shane, that Wexford won in All Ireland. I got an All-Star, you know, everything came right like in the 1 year, but I was within inches of probably saying, it's never going to happen, you know. So you can be very, very lucky. But I think Griffin's he was pretty hard on me now, you know.
So you didn't necessarily get on because everyone talks about, you know, legend led you to the promised land and all that, which is all true. But it can't.
Yeah.
Not everyone can get on perfectly all the time. You have to, you know, break a few eggs to make an omelette, as they say.
You do, and in fairness to Liam Griffin, Shane, you know, a lot of the problem was with me, and I would also say that myself and Liam Griffin are the best of friends, you know, now. And if I had a problem, he'd be the first one I'd ring up to see what would you do, you know. But it's the typical syndrome of the player being dropped and rebelling against everything that he does, you know. And Liam had dropped me, and I was totally anti what Liam was doing, and I suppose it was by slight default. Poor old Paul Codd, who I would rate as one of the greatest hurlers. Paul broke his leg then before I came on against Kilkenny, and Paul broke his leg against before the Dublin game, and I got in there, and I'm convinced that I wasn't going to be played in the Leinster final. And I remember telling the selectors that and having a big satoo with them in the dressing room in Wexford Park. And I was more amazed than anyone that I was picked for the Leinster final. And then the thing just took off. Like, probably, I thought '93 was probably the best year I ever had with Wexford, but '96 I probably played three of the better games that I would have played. The final, not so much, but the Leinster final and the All Ireland semi-final were probably two of the better games I played. So, but we knocked off each other, and I wouldn't have been the one to buy in. Maybe, you know, Billy, George, Martin Story, those lads didn't buy in, or they bought in straight away to what Liam was doing. Trust, loyalty, honesty, and, you know, everything. But I was kind of always one of the cynics, maybe. But I'm kind of glad I did buy into it now, to be honest with you, you know. And the experience of having him as a manager it just stayed with me, even in life's lessons, really. Some of the stuff he did they were off the wall, but they were magnificent, really.
I'm trying to understand what you'd have been cynical about, because obviously I wasn't there, so I don't understand it. And again, it all worked out. So when it works out, everything that the manager tried was obviously genius to do so. But what were you cynical about, other than the fact that you were in and out of the team a little bit for a while? What were you cynical about? And it all worked out, so I'm sure you could be honest enough about it.
Yeah, no, I think Shane, and we've all been in this position. You're talking about a disgruntled player who really, well, first of all, around Christmas, Liam had said to me, more or less spelt it out. I really don't think you're going to cut the mustard this year. And I was kind of out of the panel for maybe 3 or 4 weeks at that stage. And I suppose cynical is not the word I should use. And this sounds very soft in a GAA terms, but I suppose I was hurt, in that this man was making a call which was quite right to make. Every manager is right to make it, but I was kind of hurt by the call that I was kind of seeing that I wasn't going to be wanted anymore. And it's really typical of any kind of player that's not making the team, particularly a 31-year-old player, Shane. If you were 19 or grand, and then allied to that, this guy, and I suppose he was doing some of the most off the wall stuff. Like, you were going down to Ballytrent Beach, getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, sleeping in an army tent, getting up, doing weights on the beach, and we were walking up along the line. Is this guy for real, or is he cracked, or what the hell is he going? And then even some of the stuff I suppose that turned out to be folklore. Stopping on the border, going across the border. Like, I was going to that Leinster final, not sure if I'll get 20 minutes, 25 minutes, or he'll have me off after 5 minutes. Because I felt I was very lucky to be on the team. And the next one we stop on the border, Liam gives a talk about the 1798, the blood in our veins, and something we're very, very proud of. But he was I suppose he had a very romantic view of it, and he tapped into the emotional energy that we had. But I was a little bit cynical, and I remember going across the border and saying to Shane Carley, well, we'll have to come down the Naas dual carriageway for a bit here, because we can't walk across the border if he tells us we're not walking back in till we're getting restoring pride and honour. So I was, I suppose, to a certain extent, a little bit cynical. But now I look back as a more mature adult and what we've achieved, and say that he was the most incredible manager that I've ever come across. Some of the stuff that he, like Father Jim Butler, was incredible with Buffer's Alley, and Liam Griffin was just incredible with some of the stuff. Like some of the, he always found a different way of getting into your mind, kind of as such. He came out to me then, Shane, after the Leinster final, which I had a good game. And he said to me, after I thought trying to get rid of me, he said to me, I don't know how, I really want to find a way now to get back into your brain, to have you as up for the semi-final as I had you up for the Leinster final, and I was saying, sure, you were going to drop me for the Leinster final. And but he always had he had a great way of motivating you, almost getting you to the brink of catching him by the neck, and yet doing it in a really nice way. Like, you never really fell out with the man, and I hope I'm being fair on him, because we wouldn't have won All Ireland if we hadn't had Liam Griffin, and he was fully justified in. Like, I'll give you one example. He would always felt that I didn't train hard enough, so I never realised this was set up. But Sean Collier, who was a contender for the Irish middleweight boxing title that time, and he was the European kickboxing champion, was our physical trainer. So Griffin kind of felt, this lad needs to be put in his place, Dempsey, and we used to get in for maybe three minutes rounds with Sean Collier, and we'd do a little bit of boxing with them, and everyone would take their turn. But I got in anyway, and into a ring. It was a full-size ring in Dominic Kiernan's gym. But I should have noticed that the training stopped, and all the lads came in to look at me getting into the ring with Collier. So I was there anyway. We were supposed to box ourselves out, but Collier was kind of waiting, and he was expecting me to throw a punch, and I waited till Collier stopped, and I got him right on the chin with a box. Didn't take much, and without thinking, I'd say Sean hit me a box. Now, I would say, Shane, he lifted me off my feet and landed me straight back on my back, and there was a big cheer at the side, and I just turned around like Roberto Duran, remember that time, and said, no mass, that's it. Stepped out, jaw out like that. I think Sean Collier got a bigger fright now, but it was kind of Griffin was kind of, I walked by Griffin, I walked into the dressing room, I could see him smiling going by, but it was kind of his way of saying, you need your wings clipped, son, and they're after being clipped there tonight, kind of. So whereas Liam didn't come across like Gerlach Nan as absolutely nothing got in his way, he did what he had to do, and he put players in their place. And sure, looking back, what would I have if you hadn't done it, really, But I was a pretty sore man that night, now, I'll tell you.
And so, when you look back on it, you got, was it 1-5 in the Leinster final, 6 points in the All Ireland semi final against Galway. I think you scored 1-3 in the All Ireland final. Would you have talked to Liam afterwards to find out, was he trying to get under your skin? Did he realise, I need this player, but not the way he's been for the last year or two, we'll say?
Yeah. I do you know what? He was a very intelligent man. His psychology, the way he got into people's minds, and I'm talking different. Like if you were talking to Martin, Story, or George, or maybe Billy, or maybe any of the lads, Fitz here or Jared Cusher, they might have a different slant on it. It's just the way that this man felt he had to get into my head. When I was back, this was the way he said, "You're no good to me going at the same level of pace." He said to me one night in the gym, would you spill 500 beads of sweat to get onto the Wexford team this year? And I said, God, I would. He said, well, you won't go home and think again, because you'll have to spill 1,000 if you're going to get onto it. So that was his mantra with me. And it annoyed me the whole way along. But now I look back, I have the intelligence to look back and say, the man was completely right. Like, I needed something. Griffin needed something to get some of us onto the next level, which we had very little time to get there at 31 years of age. With the likes of George, he didn't need to do that, because George had got through the wall, so he didn't need to work that way with George. Probably didn't need to work that way with Liam Dunn. Maybe needed to work a little bit like that with myself, or maybe even Shawnee Flood. Shawnee being a great friend of mine, just needed to get us to a bit of a different level, kind of as such. And you know what? He did. He was quite amazing. He definitely was 25 to 30 years ahead of his time now, and that's true.
You mentioned George O'Connor there, and I think it was 2015 we had him in for a training session, and he's just unbelievably engaging, powerful character, very entertaining at the same time. What was he like to have in the dressing room?
Yeah, there are many different types of fellas, Shane, in the dressing room, and I would be the type. I always remember at before the pre-Griffin era, Shawnee Flood was one of the best wing backs, the best man markers. Every day that we played, Shawnee'd have to pick up Johnny Dooley or DJ, or if he always ended up picking. But he was a brilliant player. But himself and Story did all they enjoyed the fag, but they might go into the cubicle in the dressing room and you could see the smoke coming up over. So all that started. But the boys were more relaxed, and I was a fella that was a bit more relaxed. Say the Liam Dunns, maybe the Jared Cushes, the Rod Guineys, and the George, they were serious men in the dressing room. I mean, they were ready to go out through the door, through the window, whatever way you wanted. And I always remember with George in a Leinster Championship match, I was going out and I steadied myself just going out, the tunnel in Croke Park. And the next minute he pulled just above where my hand was, missed my fingers by about 2 inches, and he nearly severed my fingers. But he was very, very motivated character, and he was a tough man as well. The way some lads can talk the talk in the dressing room when we go out and we kill these lads, but George would give you a talk, and by God, he'd go out and do the very same out in the field. He was a great man that way. Very, very inspirational. We were lucky to we guys like that. And I often think as well, in dressing rooms, you wouldn't hear a word from Colin Keogh. Maybe John O'Connor, you wouldn't hear that much from John O. You wouldn't hear from Rory McCarthy. And, Gary Laffin wouldn't say very much. Larry Murphy wouldn't say. But they were guys that they played their role as well. There was a great mix in that dressing room. But by jeepers, I'll tell you one thing. Like, even in the All-Ireland final, Shane, we came out very calmly. And Griffin's ploy would have been to keep some of the calmness, because it was going to be 25 minutes before the game started. Keep a little bit of calmness in some of the boys. The George, the Rods and that, and maybe kind of keep a little bit of and he used to get the balance very, very well, kind of in the dressing room before. But it was a fair powder keg of a dressing room at times now, I have to say.
I'd imagine that. You scored a goal in an All-Ireland final, so you basically done what every kid dreams of growing up in a hurling county. Do you recall the feeling of it hitting the net when you just pulled on that breaking ball?
Yeah, I recall the feeling. Again, I don't know why it's always with corner forwards. You played in the forwards yourself. You never settle till you get a goal or a point or something, because you always fear, oh Jesus, the first one that'll come off will be the corner forward. And even though I was having a good year, I was kind of I think it was when poor old Eamon got sent off, and I knew that I was a little bit more secure because we'd only 2 full forwards left. So I was I was going to be there. But there was 2 things struck me that day. One was when I walked down to the hill before the game. Hill 16 was, Limerick had an amazing crowd there that day, but Hill 16, it was like walking into a wall of noise. It was like almost thunder hitting the ground. I remember walking down prior to the national anthem, getting ready, and this wall of sound just hit me. And I always remember, as well prepared as you always are for games, this was my first All Ireland. You're not fully prepared. And I always remember a slight buckle in my legs going down there. I said, Jesus, Mary and Joseph, I've never seen anything like this. I turned around, put me back to the hill. And I remember I settled down a little bit, took the deep breaths, did what Niamh told us and whatever. And then the next time I saw that wall was when the ball hit the net, and the ball kind of landed. And I have to be honest with you, it hit the top of the hurl rather than full on. And it kind of put Joe Quaid going the wrong way. And the ball ended up in the net. Now, I give myself credit for being in the right place at the right time, but it wasn't the best executed goal that was ever. But again, I remember the wall of noise that came off the hill that time. And we used to kind of say that time. Sometimes it's been our Achilles heel, is that we work on emotion and nostalgia a lot in Wexford, and sometimes that can let you down. But we worked on it that year, and it went in our favour. And we used to always say that when we looked down at Hill 16, that it was Vinegar Hill, that our warriors were on Hill 16, our supporters. And I always feel that we have great support. You know, we've amazing support, and I always remember being that sight of that hill, the colour on that hill, and the goal going in, and it was probably just a relief then for me as well, a kind of such that I was just delighted to get the goal, a kind of such, but it was an incredible occasion, I will say that.
You're a lucky man to score that goal, I have to say, and well, obviously you worked to get there, but a lucky man to live out the dream, I have to say. What about the fact that you played a Limerick team that had collapsed in the 5-minute final 2 years before, and now Limerick are a great county, and it wouldn't be, I'm sure, if you had the sentiment in your pre-match speech or your preparations that, lads, look, when it comes down to it, Limerick are going to buckle. You saw what happened 2 years ago. I'm sure you wouldn't be thinking that in the long term because they're a great county. But you must have been thinking that or talking about that beforehand, thinking, we're not going to back down. They've shown they will.
Yeah, well, I tell you, it's funny you say that, Shane, and this is a funny admission, and I'm not saying... Our team between 90 and 2000... I feel we should have won 2 All-Irelands. You know, I feel possibly 2 to 3 All-Irelands. I think we let ourselves down when we most needed it. I think we should have won it in 93. You know, there's no doubt about that. 98, I would have loved to play Clare. 97, whatever. Tip well had our number, but the whole. I suppose Limerick in the final. I think if Limerick had beaten Offaly in 94. I think it would have been much harder to beat Limerick in 96. And I think that a lot of the ghosts probably lay with Limerick in, like, bear in mind, every advantage was with Limerick in 96. I mean, we had 14 men from the 20th minute onwards. And, you know, if they'd hurled, they didn't hurl well, Limerick. If they'd hurled away, now I have to say our backs were absolutely outstanding that day, cutting down, freezing that. But I remember going into the dressing room at half time, we were a point up. And I was delighted. I got a point just before half-time, and I said, this is important, just to stay that bit ahead of them, even if it's only a point. But there was 2 things about it. John O'Connor kept saying in the dressing room, keep it tight. It's suiting us to keep it tight. And also in the final, I at half-time, I was talking to Seamus Barron. Seamus is a Rathnewer man, a real... You know, Rathnewer men are the cutest men about hurling, and Seamus is a great man, but they really know their hurling. And Seamus said to me, I sat down in the corner of the dressing room, he said, do you know something? He said, if we can keep it tight, keep her calm, don't be going mad, maybe let them panic, they'll be the ones to beat themselves. And the game kind of turned out a little bit like that. Like Limerick against 14 men, 4 points in the second half. You know, that wasn't that Limerick team of that era. You know, they were a swashbuckling, fabulous team. And I just think that maybe the doubts of 94 did catch up with them. And if they'd won in 94, I think they'd have been at least a harder team to beat, if almost unbeatable in 96, you know, and it is a regret that they haven't won an All-Ireland because they contributed so much to that era. And I was delighted to see them come back and win it last year, you know, or 2 years ago. It was great to see them, but I do think that 94, there was baggage there.
And Eamon Scallon getting sent off, do you recall seeing him at half time, or do you remember him walking off the field when he got the red card after the game? Because he would have had conflicting emotions, certainly when the final whistle went. No one wants to get sent off in an All-Ireland. But of course he's won it.
Yeah. I remember thinking there was a little bit of pushing and shoving, and you know, if I'm being honest, Liam might never admit it, but Liam Griffin said that you're never to be bullied on a field. No team of that I'm going to be ever to be bullied. And he said if something like that happens, he said get into to help your teammates, but don't go in with a big box, like with a big Boris Lee box or a pull or whatever, Shane. He said, go in, but give numbers there to show their support. So it made a kind of a very simple thing look a little bit bigger prior to Eamon's pull. In fairness to Pat Horan, he had to take action on the next pull. But I actually thought, in the overall context, I thought Eamon was a bit unlucky to be sent off. It was a mistimed pull, but I'm not so sure. Stephen McDonough was one of the best cornerbacks. I take Stephen, he was a great player. But I'd say if Stephen's hurl hadn't been caught up that time, he might have let Eamon know where he was standing as well. And I just thought Eamon was a little bit unlucky to be put off. He walked straight by me, and I could see his face. And I just gave him a tap with the hurl and, said, don't worry, we'll get through here or whatever. But it was a tough thing for Eamon. But All-Irelands, and I've said it with Shawnee Flood as well, All-Irelands are not won on one 40 minutes. Eamon did as much to contribute to the All-Ireland and Shawnee Flood, who didn't get to play, as did the subs or whatever. But no, there wasn't too much at half time about who was sent off. I think it was just about Griffin Cam in the dressing room. And he did put a big emphasis on not giving Gary Kirby frees and things like that, Shane.
Do you think that Limerick panicked and didn't use the spare man the right way? Do you remember how they tried to use their spare man?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually can't. I know that they tried to keep Dave Clark as the spare man in the second half, and he was a fabulous hurler. And I know that there was a kind of a bit of a rota that maybe, each forward would pick him up for a certain length of time. I used to skip those things in case I got too much hardship, but I thought that possibly in the second half, it was a low-scoring game, that maybe, just maybe, they could have pushed their spare man a little bit further up. But look, you're talking to a man here, Shane, it was over a Wexford minor team that played 13 Galway men for 5 minutes of an All-Ireland minor quarter-final, and we lost by a point. So sometimes those seconds can go very, very quickly, and you're very dependent. Maybe there was a little lack of belief on the Limerick part for the last 20-25 minutes that they could close out the game, really. And I have to say, when we got over Offaly in the Leinster final, I had no doubt that we would win the All-Ireland final now.
And so we talked in the first part of the interview about winning that All-Ireland with Buffer's Alley and that amazing feeling. Do you recall and I love asking people about that final whistle and their feeling when they heard the 3 shrill sounds of the whistle. Do you recall that?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. There was one emotion. I have a very good friend, Fintan Farrell. He was serving for the Armed Forces. He's a guard. He was away. The one summer that he actually went away, the most devoted GA man, he was away, and he came into my mind very quickly. I had a brother-in-law, obviously, who had passed away that year as well, and that came into my mind. But I suppose immediately after the match, Shane, Tony Dorn, who we've talked about earlier, I don't know how he did it. I don't know how it happened, but I was standing. Everyone seemed to go the opposite direction to me, so I was more or less standing on my own up in the square in Joe Quaid Square in front of the railway end or the railway goal, and just stood there, kind of stunned. And then all of a sudden, Tony Dorn put his arms around me. So here I was, All-Ireland final whistle. Had taken a fair bit of hardship over the years as the fella that never really did it, and you're standing with the person that you watched for years and years grabbing a ball in the same square. You were both All-Ireland. But the funny thing, myself and Tony have one thing in common. We're both All-Ireland club winners and All-Ireland inter-county winners. So here we are, standing in the one square in Croke Park, All-Ireland won, and you were All-Ireland champions. Doesn't get much better than that, and I don't know how he actually got in as quick, really, but the other memory, I suppose, my father and the GA they're great for this, really. But my father came down along the Hogan stand with my late brother-in-law, Barry Murphy, who died there recently, who hurled for Wexford. And I shook hands with him. And then one of the stewards came up and said, would your dad like to go down to the dressing room? Now, that doesn't happen, in any other sport. I said, Jesus, I'd be delighted. And he went down and he literally was totally confused. I could see him kind of looking around. He was almost, I'd say he didn't know where he was, but he was exactly in the one dream place that he had always wanted to be in his son's dressing room after an All-Ireland victory, and they're little memories that stay with you. I met my sister after, and they're memories that'll stay with you really forever, I'd say.
You still have the ribbons that were attached to the cup that day, don't you?
I said I have them in a little bag here, Shane. I said I get them out. Yeah, we were very lucky. Sinead, my wife, met Kieran O'Neill. Kieran sadly has passed away, but Kieran worked in Croke Park many years, and great Wexford man. And I remember actually I appeared on Dempsey's Den after the All Ireland on Echo Island, again before your time. But I was on with I think it was, I presume it was Ian Dempsey, but Carrie Crowley was on it as well. But Kieran, the Liam McCarthy Cup had changed that time, and I remember, I think Martin Storey was going to the Late Late Show that night or something, Liam Griffin, but they couldn't get it. There was some other function. So Kieran went into the GA Museum, robbed the old Liam McCarthy Cup. Can you imagine if that had been lost? Gave it to me to go on to the den, collect it. He was a great Wexford man, but he had the ribbons of the cup for Sinead that evening at the banquet, and just walked over, handed them to her, and he said, look, there's something that you can remember the year by. And a lovely touch from a lovely man, and a man that we miss as well. And I suppose it was a real memory of that year as well, you know.
When you mentioned that dressing room, and your dad being in there living out his dreams too, seeing you do what you did, was that the same dressing room as that you'd won the All Ireland with Buffer's Alley in, or was it a different dressing room?
No, it's funny. That dressing room was in the new Hogan stand, Shane. You know, that was a state of the art modern dressing room where you had your own little hanger and the whole works and different places. You know, the warm up thing was beside it and all that. The old dressing room the Buffer's Alley were in '89, if I remember properly, was the one under the Hogan stand. You know, you'd often see, you know, after All Ireland football finals. I remember Dublin. They were interviewing Jimmy Keaveney and a few lads in there, you know, where the whole country is in there. And it's kind of, there seems to be a kind of a beam from the stand going through the thing. And that was, we were in, so we had the best of the old and the new, Shane. We were in the old dressing room for the Club All Ireland, and we were in the new one for the All Ireland Intercounty too. So we got to see everywhere, really.
And do you have any particular highlight from the celebrations afterwards, be it that evening or the weeks after?
I suppose I never thought that it was just. I remember Colin Keogh saying, he said, Tom, we often realised or dreamt about winning an All Ireland, but we never dreamed about what it would be like after we won an All Ireland. Because for Wexford, you're talking about the first time in how many years. We don't win them terribly often, but I couldn't overemphasize, Shane, the depth of feeling for hurling in Wexford. You know, it's they live on their wits, on their emotion, and for a county that haven't had the success we'd have liked to have had. We'd have had it last year, only fewer crowd in Croke Park, but you know, I mean, for Wexford people to bring 44,000 to a Leinster final, you know, it's an incredible, what's the word, an incredible tribute to a crowd of fans, that you can have little success and yet you keep you know, bring that. But for me, I suppose, I remember I got a phone call from Mary Colbert, Mary Boggan's pub is a famous pub in Kilmuckridge, and she said, would you be able to bring the cup down on the Friday night after the All Ireland? And again, I think actually that was the evening that the Late Late Show was on. So I had the Bob O'Keefe and I brought the cup into Kilmuckridge, and we, you know, the outer lads were around. They weren't all around all the players, but I remember coming down to the top of Kilmuckridge, and there was a lone piper led myself and Seamus Kavanagh in down the street. It was kind of comical, but there must have been 5,000 people in Kilmuckridge that night. You know, I don't know how they even knew we were going to be there. And it was the mother and father of all celebrations. And I remember going up to Nicky Hamill. Nicky owned a pub up in you know, a great Buffer's Alley man, where my jersey is hanging, my Wexford jersey is hanging up there in a framed photo up with Nicky. But I remember talking to Nicky about a day later and said, you must have made a few bob the other night. He said, I made a right few bob. He said, I had no trouble. But he said there was about 3,000 quid's worth of damage done to the lights. People were hanging out of. It was just the most incredible night. And I suppose my mother was there. You know, she wasn't a drinking woman. My father was there, and my family were there. My friends were there. And I think when it comes back home, that's the night that you really remember most. And that night, the we came back home to Kilmuckridge. It was incredible. But I should going down through Gorey, going into Wexford, just incredible times, Shane. Probably didn't even appreciate how incredible we were at the time, you know.
When you see the celebrations then in 2019 when Wexford win the Leinster title under Davy Fitz, and the scenes going when they were bringing it back through Wexford, did it remind you of your All Ireland in '96?
It did, you know. You see, there's a funny thing about winning, Shane, and then when you don't win. We won in '96, and for 5 or 6 years, everybody was on a high from that All Ireland. And then there was a kind of a lull period where people were possibly saying, Jesus, I'm so fed up hearing about this 1996 thing, and it's dragging us, and we want to move on and whatever. And I suppose there's a bit of a lull there. I think this year and last year, what's happened, and I so enjoyed the Leinster final last year. I think we have a team now that we can have genuine aspirations to, and I think now that we're looking back with more nostalgia and more kind of 96 is not as important because we know that the present day team are bringing a bit of that back, and we've won a Leinster final, but it brought a lot back, and it was incredible times, but it came to a bit of an abrupt halt, I suppose, with your lads in All Ireland semi final, which I have to say was probably, Shane, the best game I've seen for years. Wexford and Tipperary last year.
It was pure drama, wasn't it?
It was, and you know what? I just thought that the composure of the tip men, when like you found yourselves 5-6 points down, 10 minutes to go in an All Ireland final. Croke Park was literally alive, and I always remember Shamie Callanan. When you went to 6 down, the ball was poked out to him. He picked the ball out, and with the minimum of drama, he nonchalantly stroked the ball over the bar. And would you believe it was when that point went over the bar, I said, Callanan is not rattled here. And I said, these Tipperary men, there's more in them. And I would say that the last 10-12 minutes was the best performance I've seen from an inter-county team in Croke Park for many years, with 14 men. It was swashbuckling stuff, And I don't know whether people agree with me or not, but Jason Ford, he just missed nothing for you last year, and I would have squeezed him in somewhere as an all-star now, and maybe people would disagree. Maybe you wouldn't disagree. I'd have squeezed him somewhere in because I always thought he was a go-to man. Bubbles his wrists, Noel McGrath. I mean, what an exhibition he gave. Now, I just thought Wexford contributed great to that game as well, Shane, and it was one of the greatest occasions it was at. We had it in our hands, but at the end of the day, probably the best team won, I think, at the end of the day.
You mentioned earlier that minor team you were involved in, and I think it was 2008, lost that quarter final to 13-man Galway. Yeah. Some of the players that are now key men on what is a really serious proposition of a Wexford team, Matt O'Hanlon, Mark Fanning, Liam McGovern, Andrew Shore was on that team, Sean Murphy, who of course is playing so well. Could you have seen them go on to do this, if you go back to losing to 13 men by a point?
Yeah, I to be honest with you, we would take full blame on the sideline that day. Liam Dunn would have done a lot of work with those young fellas as well. Liam took him at what do you call do you remember that tournament? What was the one in Tipperary, the under-16 tournament down there? And oh god, I can't. But he would have taken
Tony Farr, no, the Paddy Cummins, is it?
Yeah, something like that, and he would have taken him at that. No, I always saw incredible potential that day. What happened with Galway that day, Shane, was there was only about 4 minutes left, and it's amazing how quickly time goes. Galway 2 men put off one after another. Teams were level, and we didn't win our last 3 or 4 puckouts. Galway did. They scraped through by a point. In our defence, I suppose 3 or 4 minutes, you need to be very calm, but we probably should have issued an instruction very quickly to play a short puck out or whatever. But I always saw in that group that they could have won a minor All Ireland that year. But the Sean Murphys, Paul Morris's, they had an incredible character about them. They were exceptional hurlers, and I always feel that they were always destined to play for Wexford, number one. They were always destined to bring us back up to the top table, and I think they have done that.
And just looking at the current team and the way they play fantastic brand of hurling, I get the sense that you'd actually excel in this team. Lovely ball going into you, that sort of thing.
I think you're saying that tongue in cheek there now, Shane. But no, a lot of people probably say, looking at me, would he have the legs to play this type of game and whatever? But most of my hurling club-wise, and even All Ireland under-21 final in 86, I would have played centre-back, midfield, centre-forward, and I much preferred being out the field. Now, whether I'd want to chase Liam Ryan from the full back line back to my own half to see him scoring a point or whatever, or corner-back that goes forward the whole time, I'm not sure. But I think probably like an awful lot of players, Shane, you would learn to adapt. That's why it's very hard to judge from different eras. But, people say with Tony Doran suit this type of play. But, Tony Doran would be very like Conor MacDonald in the way he plays. Very good wrists, very good to see a man or whatever. So I would have. And the other thing I'd say is that you play corner forward in my era, and the ball mightn't come up 6 times in a whole game and mightn't come up for 20 minutes. And the next minute, the corner forward, whisk him off, as the fella says. And, that's not a nice. Whereas now the ball, there is a kind of a process where the ball is being delivered to the forward. So you probably would get easier possession. So I wouldn't mind trying it. It's just, I suppose everything has gone so different. I mean, even the style of hurling, you only have to look at the teenage. I will have to say that the skill level has gone through the roof now at the moment, Michael. When I look at Bubbles' wrists, I don't know if I saw anything like that over the years now, I have to say.
Um, you spoke earlier about Wexford playing on emotion, that type of thing. Did that make Davy Fitz a good match for Wexford? Do you think that what year after is precisely what he was bringing to the party?
Yeah, I think, look, he certainly has done a very good job. What you worry about, I suppose, is when he goes, there needs to be a succession placed in the situ now very shortly. But I think Davy wears his heart in his sleeve. I think Wexford people wear their heart in their sleeve. I think Davy goes a lot with emotion. Wexford love this kind of sentiment and this romantic way of playing hurling, and maybe that's why we weren't. And I think it all tailors in together. And I think he was a good fit. And to be honest with you, the last couple of years, Shane, have been just outstanding for Wexford. We've been Leinster champions. We've enjoyed, I think, being very close to being in an All Ireland final, and maybe winning it this year. So, and we've had some amazing games down in Wexford Park. We've had great days in Croke Park. No, I think it's been a great fit over the last couple of years.
And not to put the kibosh on it, but do you think that this team and those players that I'm sure you know very well, even having some of them at minor, do you think the hurling is in them to go all the way?
I think it is. I mean, I've been mentioning Bubbles, and I've been seeing, like, Tipperary are blessed with incredible forwards. For me at the moment, I think Limerick are the team that presently hold the aces if it comes to All Ireland Championship, but that may not play out. But we have our players as well. I mean, if you look at, I mentioned Conor MacDonald, Rory O'Connor. We have players now that really do look like they're the real deal at the moment. And Liam Ryan is just outstanding fullback. Mark Fanning. I could go down through all the players really, but we've been up there with any of them. And yourself, the only worry I have is that sometimes Wexford have to be a little bit lucky and a little bit better to win in All Ireland. At the moment, we're probably third or fourth in the pecking order, and it would take a lot for us to win. Sometimes, every so often, maybe every 10 years, 12 years, there comes an opportunity to win in All Ireland. This year, sorry, the year just gone out, 2019, I hope that wasn't our opportunity, because, even though I don't blame anyone for this, I just think it was a magnificent game. I thought Tip were brilliant. 10 minutes to go, 12 minutes to go, 14 men, you're 6 points up, All Ireland semi final. You've already beaten the team that are in the All Ireland final. Gee, it really looked to be set up for us, didn't it, this year, and that's my only worry. Like, you need a bit of luck.